Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 289, Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana is almost here. It goes down on June 10th in Canada, and we are going to take a look at the pay-per-view portion of the card, briefly discuss each fight, and then at the end of the video, we are going to grade UFC 289 on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst pay-per-view ever, 10 being the greatest pay-per-view of all time, and we are going to answer the question whether or not UFC 289 is worth your money. Should you purchase UFC 289? Now, before I get into anything, I want you to take a brief look at the main card of UFC 289, and I want you to comment down below what grade would you give UFC 289 on a scale from 1 to 10 before you even hear my opinion. Now, also, I want to mention this because I don't want anyone jumping down in the comments and talking about the prelims. We are only talking about the pay-per-view portion of this card. We're not talking about any of the prelims. I understand Nasruddin Imavov versus Chris Curtis is on the prelims. I understand Khalil Roundtree versus Chris Dawkins is on the prelims. We are only talking about the pay-per-view portion of this card. Also, I've already done a bunch of UFC 289 content. Top 3 reasons I love the card. Top 3 reasons I hate the card. I will link my entire UFC 289 playlist down in the description. But I do these types of videos for every single UFC pay-per-view. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I would greatly appreciate it. Okay, now how do I grade a UFC card? There is 3 factors I look at in no particular order when I grade a UFC card. 1 is relevance to the division. Is it a title fight? Is it a contender fight? Is it a fight to get into the top 15? 2, what are the skill sets of the fighter? Are they bottom of the barrel UFC fighters? Are they kind of middle of the pack UFC fighters? Are they the elite of the elite? And lastly, on paper, does this style matchup appear as if it will deliver? Does it appear as if it will be a fan-friendly matchup? When you look at it on paper, okay, oh, this fight's definitely going to be exciting. That is the last factor I look at when kind of grading a UFC card. So starting off with the first fight on the main card, we have Marc-Andre Barriault versus Eryk Anders. This is a fight that, honestly, when you look at it, you know why it's on the main card. Marc-Andre Barriault is from Canada, and that's the true reason why this is opening up the main card. This really doesn't belong on the main card, but this is a decent fight. This is a middleweight fight. Marc-Andre Barriault's coming off that crazy fight at UFC 285 against Julian Marquez. Incredible win there, incredible stamina, incredible finish. And Eryk Anders has been around forever, and he's relatively exciting. But these are just 2 guys who, even in a middleweight division that's not stacked like the lightweight division or the welterweight division, these are just 2 guys that are always just going to kind of hang around at that mid-tier UFC fight. I don't think either guy will ever be ranked. Eryk Anders is never going to be ranked. Marc-Andre Barriault, of course, he can improve and eventually maybe make his way into the top 15. But I just think he's going to be relegated to one of those guys that just is kind of a gatekeeper for that top 20, top 15 area. And I just really believe the UFC put this fight on the card just to fill a spot and just to have a Canadian on the main card of UFC 289, the return to Canada. And that's pretty much it. I mean, do I think both guys are skilled? Yes, both guys are skilled. Are they the elite of the elite? Absolutely not. Is it going to be an exciting fight? I believe it will be an exciting fight. I believe most likely we will see a finish in this fight. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't have a relevance to the division. And for me, that's what gets me most excited for a fight, is relevance to the division. Are these guys fighting to be in the top 15? Are they fighting for a contender spot? Are they fighting for a #1 contender spot? Are they fighting for a title? I don't think this is a bad fight. I don't think it's absolutely terrible to put it on the main card. But basically, it's just for the Canadian crowd. They have someone to root for opening up the main card. Not really dying to see that fight by any means, but it's a decent fight. Moving up the card, we have Dan Ige versus Nate Landwehr. Now, this fight, I think, would be perfect as like a headliner for a prelim or even opening up the main card of UFC 289. Dan Ige, even though he's only won 1 out of his last 4, and the only win is coming against Damon Jackson in his hairline, I think this is a matchup that could be very fun, but I also think it could end very quickly because Nate Landwehr, he's on a 3-fight winning streak. And he's taken a lot of damage, and he's kind of like the Darren Elkins, the new Darren Elkins. But Dan Ige is a big step up in competition. And I do like this fight because Nate Landwehr, if he beats Dan Ige, I think that's a great spot for him because now he's going to enter the top 15 of the featherweight division because Dan Ige is ranked number 13 currently. So this is a fight that matters. I think this will be an exciting fight. Dan Ige, I think, is a very highly skilled fighter. I thought he beat Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett went from that fight to fight for an interim title in the featherweight division. I thought Dan Ige won that fight. And I know he got mauled by Movsar Evloev and beat up by Movsar Evloev, but now he's fighting Nate Landwehr, who's an absolute savage, who takes damage very well and comes from behind and wins. I mean, that fight against David Onama was craziness. So I think this is a fight that's relevant to the division, in the top 15 of the featherweight division. I think there's no way it's boring. I do think Nate Landwehr could be out of his element a little bit with the step up in competition, and I think we could see an early finish, but Landwehr is so durable, and he's only ever been finished by KO or TKO twice in his career. So I think this could be a very fun fight. If it's anything like that David Onama fight, could you imagine? And it's relevant to the division. I also think both guys have a relatively good skill set. I think Dan Ige is an elite fighter. To what extent you want to say he's an elite fighter, that can be up for debate. But I think there's no doubt at one point in time he was a top 10 featherweight. And Nate Landwehr is now getting that step up in competition for an opportunity to prove he belongs with those guys. And can durability and toughness take him to maybe a top 5 spot or a top 10 spot in the division? That remains to be seen. But if he beats Dan Ige, he's in a very good spot for a big fight in the division. And I'm actually really looking forward to this fight. Do I think it screams pay-per-view fight by any means? Do I think it would be a main event of a fight night card? Absolutely not. But I think it's a solid fight, and I have no problem with this being on the main card of a pay-per-view. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Nate Landwehr deals with this step up in competition. He's been so tough and so durable and taken a lot of damage and survived and has come back and won. But against a guy like Dan Ige, who has unbelievable power, look what he did to Damon Jackson in his last fight. And Dan Ige has very good striking. I think Dan Ige is one of the most underrated fighters in the featherweight division, to be honest. I'm very curious how this fight plays out. I think both guys have a great skill set. And I also think that this fight is relevant to the division. So this kind of checks all the boxes. I'm really looking forward to this featherweight fight. Moving up on the card, we have Mike Malott versus Adam Fugitt in the featured fight of UFC 289. What does this fight even mean? This is another fight. The only reason this is on the main card of UFC 289 is because Mike Malott is Canadian. I mean, he has, one fight in the UFC, 2 fights in the UFC, came off Contender Series. I mean, he had a good win against Johan Lines in his last fight, but he doesn't belong in the featured fight of the main card. That is craziness. Just for comparison, back at UFC 285, featured fight on the card, Jeff Neal versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. That's crazy. We're getting Mike Malott versus Adam Fugitt in the featured fight of this card. Or I think it might be pronounced Malott. I can't remember. This fight is only there because of the Canadian crowd. And honestly, I think it's a slap in the face. Like, oh, we're not going to put a lot of good fights on this card, so let's just stack it with Canadians. They don't know who's good and who's not. That's what I feel like the UFC is kind of doing here. And I think it's disturbing. I'm not really dying to see this fight. I think these are two guys who are kind of making their way up in the division, but we don't even know where their skill sets are at currently. They're decent fighters, don't get me wrong. But Adam Fugitt's 1-1 in the UFC. You know, Mike Malott is, 2-0 in the UFC, but a win over Mickey Gall. What does that really mean? Featured fight of a main card. This has no business. I think it will be a decent fight. I don't think it's going to be the worst fight ever, but it's not relevant to the division at all. It's not a big fight at all. And I'm not really dying to see this matchup. And this deserves to be like opening up the prelims. And it's a featured fight on a main card. That just goes to show you how the UFC standards over the last few years have just fallen off a cliff. Let's move on to the co-main event. I don't want to talk about that fight anymore. We have Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush. This fight, this co-main event, this lightweight co-main event does a lot of heavy lifting for UFC 289. This is the people's main event. It is an absolute travesty that this fight is not 5 rounds. It may not need 5 rounds. It may last 1 round. It may last 2 rounds. This deserves to be 5 rounds. This is an amazing matchup. This is a fight that was booked back in 2020 when it was not as relevant as it is today, and it unfortunately didn't happen back then, but now we're finally getting it. It was booked for 288. Oliveira pulled out with an injury, but then it got rescheduled to UFC 289. This is the fight that makes UFC 289 worth watching. I mean, Charles Oliveira, one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC all time, just lost his title against Islam Makhachev back at UFC 280. And such a disappointing loss for Oliveira. He got dominated in that fight. And Islam Makhachev just proved that he is one of the best fighters in the lightweight division. But Oliveira is never in a boring fight. I mean, of his 33 pro MMA wins, 9 by knockout and 21 by submission. That is crazy. 29 out of his 33 fights have been finished. That is insane. Or 29 out of his 33 wins. Or actually 30 out of his 33 wins have been finishes. That is insane. Then you have Beniel Dariush, who's on this crazy long winning streak, arguably already deserves a lightweight title shot. And he's proved he's one of the best in the world. He came back off an injury and fought Mateusz Gamrot. A lot of people thought he was going to lose that fight. I picked against him. And he looked better than ever against Mateusz Gamrot. Stuffing the takedowns, even dropped him, looked amazing on the feet. And Beniel Dariush has been making his way towards a title shot for a long time. And he's a relatively exciting fighter. How can you forget that fight against Drakkar Klose where he came from behind, he got hurt badly, then comes back to knock out Drakkar Klose. I know some of his wins before the Gamrot fight haven't aged the greatest. Tony Ferguson, Carlos Diego Fajeda. But, Beniel Dariush is on this long winning streak. He arguably already deserves a lightweight title shot. He was already matched up with Islam before Islam got the title shot, and that fight fell through because Beniel got injured. I think this is stylistically, you can't get much more of a compelling fight because this could arguably be for number one contender spot in the lightweight division. Beniel definitely, if he wins this fight, he will be fighting for the title against Islam Makhachev in Abu Dhabi at UFC 294. For Charles Oliveira, he's looking to get back in the win column. If he loses to Beniel Dariush, imagine he gets finished again. The Charles Oliveira fan base's heads are going to explode. That's going to be crazy for Oliveira to be on a 2-fight losing streak after that title run that he had, where he fought Chandler and he fought Poirier and he fought Gaethje and finished all of them. And this fight, it couldn't have higher stakes. Really, outside of a title, it could not have higher stakes. This is an amazing matchup. Both guys are the elite of the elite. Charles Oliveira's jiu-jitsu, Charles Oliveira's forward pressure, Charles Oliveira's striking, incredible. And then you have Beniel Dariush, whose striking has looked better than ever. He has great power. He has great grappling himself. He's not going to be scared to go to the ground with Charles Oliveira. That's what makes this fight so compelling. That's what made Oliveira versus Makhachev so compelling, because we knew Makhachev, he wasn't going to be scared to go to the ground with Oliveira. And look, he submitted Oliveira. So this is a highly compelling matchup. This is the people's main event. I am dying to see this fight. If this fight somehow got canceled, UFC 289 is basically a fight night card at that point in time. This is a fight that I'm dying to see. This is the people's main event. There is no doubt in my mind Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush will be an absolute amazing fight for as long as it lasts. Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler, I talk about it all the time. One of the most exciting fights I've ever seen, and only lasted one round and then 30 seconds of the second round. So that's insanity. I think this is going to be a great fight. Massive implications for the lightweight division. Really looking forward to this matchup. Moving on to the main event, we have Amanda Nunes defending her bantamweight title against Irene Aldana. To be honest, this isn't a horrible fight. Amanda Nunes considered the greatest of all time, greatest woman fighter of all time. And you have Irene Aldana, who's on a 2-fight winning streak. She's finished her last 2 opponents. The up kick to the body in her last fight was insane at UFC 279, where she's on her back. I think it was 1-1 in terms of rounds. Somebody won the first round. The other fighter won the second round. I don't remember which was which. It was coming down to the third round. And it looked like Chasson was going to win that third round. She took her down. She gets an up kick to the liver. Aldana finishes her with that. That is one of the craziest finishes I've ever seen. And originally, Amanda Nunes was supposed to take on Juliana Pena in a trilogy on this fight card as the main event, which was a horrible fight in my opinion. There was no reason to see that after she got 50-43 in her last fight. So this is a much welcome change to the card after Pena pulled out with an injury. But am I dying to see this matchup? To be honest, I'm not. I don't know if it's the UFC promotion. I don't know if it's me just kind of being down on the division as a whole. But I do think this is a much better matchup than people are giving credit for. I think Irene Aldana has a chance to win this fight. I think has much more of a chance than Juliana Pena would have had in a trilogy. Just because I think she's durable. I think she's well-rounded. I think she's big. A lot of times Amanda Nunes has a size advantage on her opponent. And this is for the bantamweight title, but what's that title really for? The bantamweight division has not been developed by the UFC at all. It's just not a really good division. And then you have the featherweight division that Nunes is technically the champion of, a division that doesn't exist. I don't know. I'm not dying to see this fight. I think it's better than people giving it credit for, including myself, which I'm kind of like downing it now. But I think it's a solid fight. I think it's way better than the original main event, which was Juliana Pena getting a trilogy fight for no reason. But at the end of the day, I just don't think this fight is all that great. I don't think it's going to be crazy exciting. I don't know who's going to win this matchup. Most likely Nunes wins it. I think Aldana has a chance, but is Nunes going to fall back in that complacency that she did when she lost to Pena? That's the real storyline here. And honestly, I'm just waiting for Amanda Nunes to win one more fight and then potentially just retire in the cage and say, oh, I'm done. And then the division is completely left in shambles. What are you going to leave it to be ruled by Juliana Pena? Oh, God, no. So I do think this fight is intriguing. I do think these are two high-level women's fighters. But for me, the perception of the competitiveness, for me personally, isn't where it should be. I just feel like, okay, Amanda Nunes is going to win this. Aldana was losing her last fight before she got a Hail Mary up kick to the liver, which, what are the chances of that happening? And I just think this is a matchup. It's not the matchup itself that makes me hate it. It's the division. It's the bantamweight division. I believe it's slowly dying and the UFC's not doing anything about it. But other than that, I think it should be a decent fight. I think it is a high-level fight. And it has the biggest stakes you could possibly imagine. But for me, I'm not dying to see this matchup. I'm not super excited to see this matchup. But I think it is a quality women's MMA fight. I'm not one of these people that's just constantly shitting on women's MMA. But this main event, I just feel like if this was a co-main event, I'd be a lot more excited. You know, it's just like people buy Little Caesars pizza because it's like $5. Oh, it's great for $5. Not to me, but I'm saying people who buy it. But if that pizza, that same nasty pizza was $15 or $20, people be saying this pizza's nasty. This pizza ain't worth it. So I just feel like for your $85, getting this as a main event is just not great. I couldn't imagine buying tickets to the live event to see Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana. There is no doubt in my mind the people who are buying tickets are there to see Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush. Now, as far as a grade for this card, I've went over the entire card. I like the Dan Ige Nate Landwehr fight. I love the Charles Oliveira Beniel Dariush fight. And the main event is okay. It's not the greatest. It's not the worst. It really should be a co-main event on like a bigger card. But I think it's a decent main event. But overall, you just have those two filler fights that I just believe don't even belong on a pay-per-view main card in 2023. I have to give UFC 289 a 3.5. And honestly, Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush is doing all the heavy lifting there. Because if that fight is not there, this card is like a 1 out of 10. So I'm giving it a 3.5. I thought about giving it a 3. I thought about giving it a 2.5. But I just couldn't give a card with Oliveira on it a 2.5. So it's a 3.5 out of 10 card, in my opinion. Is it worth your money? If you love watching Charles Oliveira fight, yes, it is worth your money. If you could be okay with skipping Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush, go ahead. Go ahead. If that fight isn't a must-see for you, absolutely skip this card. Because believe me, if Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush wasn't on this card, there's no way this should be a pay-per-view whatsoever in any regard. So I think that really makes the card. I do think the Nate Landwehr Dan Ige fight is decent, and I do think we could see Amanda Nunes lose again. There's a chance. I don't think she does, but that's kind of the compelling storyline. Is Amanda Nunes going to become too complacent and lose to Irene Aldana? I don't think it happens, so I don't think the fight's that great. And then we have nothing to look forward to in the women's bantamweight division next. What are we going to give Holly Holm? Her 17th undeserved title shot after this? I don't know. And that's why ultimately I decided to give it a 3.5 out of 10. Let me know what you thought of my score down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.